Rita Panahi, what do you make of Albo's chances of surviving the next few months or even the next year?
Well, what a year he's had, because he started off on an absolute high. Scott Morrison was beaten up really unfairly, I thought, and blamed almost like he'd set every bloody bushfire that the country endured at the start of the year just because he took a 5-6 day break during the fires, which had been raging for months, by the way. So it's not like, you know, there was a big bushfire front and he decided this is a good time for me to go overseas. But anyway, so at that point, Albo was flying. And then you look at the last 4-5 months and his figures are absolutely in the toilet. He's got the people within the party who are the sort of sensible centrists walking away in open conflict with him. And this was always going to happen. Again, the media almost in unison celebrated Albo, saying what a wonderful, leader he was going to be, how much better than Bill Shorten, that the membership had it right, they should have always gone with Albo. But the biggest problem Labor have is that they have gone too far left. That's why they lost the unlosable election. And then they've elected a leader who's from the socialist left faction of the party. So unless he's going to pretend to be a centrist and advocate for a bunch of policies that he doesn't actually believe in, how are they ever going to get back those voters that left them in 2019? And I think Albo's greatest strength is the fact that he appears like a genuine person. He's authentic, and they're going to have to get rid of that authenticity if he's going to pretend to be a centrist who's economically responsible and isn't going to be putting forward these crazy green policies that are going to bankrupt the country.
Well, James, I think Rita's analysis is absolutely spot on there. And I think it was Paul Murray who came up with the phrase "each way Albo." Yes. And it's a terrific moniker, and it's taken off, and it's certainly used in politics, and it has become the kind of defining imagery of Albo. I don't think he'll ever shake the each way Albo idea. But the problem is, because he has to appeal to, as Rita says, his convictions are on one side, and yet to appeal the electorate are on the other side. James, do you think there's any hope for him? I mean, he's a dud. He was a dud. I said all along he was a dud. I couldn't understand why Labor went down that path, but I don't understand Labor anyway. I don't understand how their brains work. But what's your take on next year for Albo's future?
Albo is beloved and got a very good run in certain segments of the media because Albo is very much of the same class as an awful lot of journalists. He is from the inner west of Sydney. He is the member from Marrickville. He is a middle-aged guy who likes craft beer and old records. He is exactly...
Nothing wrong with old records, hang on.
Nothing wrong, all right, nothing wrong with old records, but I'm saying that the persona that he basically inhabits is very, very similar to that of a lot of the people who are covering him, which means that they actually wind up covering for him. And so people didn't realize what a dud he actually turned out to be until they started listening to his speeches, started listening to his talking, and started to realize that when it comes down to it, A, he doesn't have a lot in the tank in terms of new ideas. Number two, he keeps getting pulled in both directions. You know, he's an inner city guy with very inner city obsessions, but he's got a Labour Party that is traditionally more socially conservative and that does not sit well with those inner city obsessions. So therefore, he's got people like Joel Fitzgibbon and other people within the party pulling that party apart. And I tell you what, if they were to ditch Albo for somebody who was more socially conservative, I think, and also economically nationalist, they would wind up with a very formidable candidate. Because I'll tell you what, we can hang a lot of garbage on Albo here, because this is the guy to Albo, but Scott Morrison also has to, pardon me, he also has to...
Oh, no, James has got the corona. You've got the corona,
now. Well, let's put James out of his misery. Let's put James out of his misery.
But Morrison has revealed himself to be quite weak in all of this, over borders, over a number of other things, promising that things will open up eventually, but he hasn't done his leadership job, I think, as well as he could have either. So Labor is in the box seat if they can get somebody better up against him.
Rita, let's play the game of who should replace Albo. I mean, Joel Fitzgibbon is an obvious choice. He's been on Outsiders. He's the only member of the Labor Party that would come on Outsiders, which immediately gives him a huge tick of approval. I would have thought amongst Labor voters, we have many Labor voters or ex-Labor voters who watch Outsiders, and they do so because the Labor Party has deserted them in favour of this inner-city green left woke garbage. Joel Fitzgibbon has come on Outsiders, so that puts him in the front seat as far as I'm concerned. Rita, who do you think? Christina Keneally, perhaps?
Well, it's the only way she can go, and our friend Paul Murray does say that she's going to keep failing up to the Prime Ministership at some point, so why not? You know what? Their talent doesn't run that deep. Certainly Bill Shorten is hanging around. He is convinced that he's going to get another run at it and become Prime Minister. He is going to finally get there, so he's got to be in the running. Tanya Plibersek is a natural nomination. She was deputy for a long time.
Far classier act than Keneally, I would have thought. Tanya Plibersek has a lot more gravitas.
Politics, absolutely, but her politics and her positions on a wide range of policies, you know, how different are they from Albo's?
It's Albo in a skirt, yeah.
They're neighbouring seats. They're basically neighbouring seats, and they, you know, they have the same inner city obsessions. And it was these inner city obsessions that killed Shorten last time around.
And I think it just would not be authentic to have someone like Fitzgibbon there because, yes, he's sort of old school Labor. He might be the Labor of Hawke and Keating, but that's not the party now. So to have him as leader is not really representative of what the party stands for, what their policies are, and what they're, you know, put forward for the last decade. So I just don't think that's going to happen anyway. So I think it's going to be between Plibersek and Shorten, and Miles, I guess, would be one who would be a bit of an outsider.
Well, I think
not our sort of outsider.
No, I think unfortunately Miles. Oh, come on, Richard Miles. Next year, come on Outsiders. Let's throw that invitation out there, and I guarantee whichever one picks it up and runs with it has a chance of actually winning the next election for Labor. So there you go, Labor leadership contenders. Pick up the phone, come on Outsiders. Let's test if you really know how to speak to mainstream Australia. Be interesting to watch next year. I won't sit there. Oh, it's gone off already. It's Anthony Albanese. He won't. No, I'm just joking. Rita, the way that the left got in America was to put up basically a Bill Shorten, the old version, or a Joel Fitzgibbon in the shape of Joe Biden, and say, look, we're still that sort of old-fashioned Labor, and we'll sneak in the mad lefty behind him, Kamala. Do you think Labor needs to do a similar trick here?
Well, it didn't work with Bill. I mean, when he was running, he was supposed to be the sort of sensible centrist, and he was passionately pushing an agenda that was far left, radical left. You know, they were going to get rid of negative gearing. They were going to, you know, get their dirty paws on the savings of retirees. I mean, that was a policy framework that was radical. And we had members of the team come out and say, oh, if you don't like it, don't vote for it. And guess what? People didn't vote for it.
Now, nobody's mentioned Chris Bowen as a leadership contender, James. Fill me in again. I'm really puzzled. Why would nobody be thinking of Chris Bowen as a leadership contender?
Well, because they talked about him that way 10 years ago, but then he moved further and further to the left the closer he got to the possibility of power. But Rita brings up a really excellent point here, which is that Labor was basically dudding an awful lot of its own working class members who've done very, very well. A lot of working class people now make very large salaries working in mines, working in tunneling projects, all sorts of, you know, complicated hard work. They've got big retirement plans. They've got investment properties. And union people that I've spoken to said that a lot of what Shorten was talking about in that last election was actually a direct hit at the aspirational union left or the union labor movement. And Labor needs to figure out, do they work for Labor anymore, or do they work for a bunch of inner city Greens, you know, sipping kombucha and talking about their solar subsidies?
Well, I reckon I've got the solution how Labor can win the next election. Dominion voting machines. It's the perfect way.
Oh, no.
That's all you need, Dominion voting machines, and feed in those ballots for ScoMo, and out come the ballots for Bill Shorten or Joel or whoever else. That's my take on how Labor could win. Maybe others will disagree with me. James, what do you think? Do you think there will be an election this year? Next year?
Next year? No, I suspect they're going to keep it going until 2022. They've got plenty of time to do it. And I suspect that if Labor changes, they're going to want to change as close to the election as possible to try and move the needle. And I suspect that the identity politics of having Tanya Plibersek front the next election will be almost an irresistible force, even though she comes from the left faction, and a lot of people on the right will be reluctant to support her. Everyone also remember, it's a lot harder to change leaders now in the Labour Party ever since Rudd changed the rules back in 2010.
Good old Kevin Rudd. He left such a great legacy, didn't he? What a great legend. Rita, do you think there will be a federal election next year, 2021, to capitalise on the so-called success of defeating the virus, or will ScoMo hang out till the following year?
Yeah, I think it's more likely that he'll go through to 2022. But how hilarious is it that Kevin Rudd continues to damage Labor by putting in place, because he could not handle being knifed. Back then, he was blaming his colleagues, not blaming us in the Murdoch press. But now he puts forward these rules that make it so much more difficult to get rid of a leader who's just not working and who really needs to be replaced for the good of the party. Thank you, Kev.
So basically, Kevin Rudd has succeeded where Malcolm Turnbull failed. He's haunting the party. Malcolm tried to be a ghost, but he failed even at that. That's it for Outsiders Guide for all time. We will see you on Outsiders late in January, the long weekend of Australia Day weekend, if Australia Day still exists by then. We will see you then. Rita Panahi, James Morrow, Rowan Dean saying Merry Christmas to all you outsiders. Good night.